World building is a magical part of creating your narrative, creating the existing lived in experience that your characters get to move around in. However, one of the most important elements of world building is a rich history and engaging lore. Okay? This lore for your world could mean the difference between a setting that feels lived in or a place where something is happening. Historical events, myths, and legends can add depth, context, and authenticity to your story, a truthfulness to it. Because either you're writing a narrative where things are just happening because they need to happen and it's only plot, or you're creating a world where these characters are not just things to make things happen. They are a part of something greater. Their involvement is creating a history as well as coming from a history. That's why today we're going to talk about world building tips for creating history and legends. Exploring history and lore in the world. The past, okay, is what shapes the present. Historical events, myths, anything from cultural legends, all these things contribute to the way your world functions today. By exploring the history and lore of your world, you give it a sense of depth that makes it feel more real, more truthful. It provides context for your characters' actions, beliefs, and challenges they may face. It molds the world around them, and they mold the world to come. Especially if you're writing in a series of books or if you're writing books that all take place in the world, these things could all be linked. History provides a foundation, okay, for your world. All right. Major events such as wars, revolutions, migrations, or the rise and fall of empires can significantly influence the way your world looks and feels. You want to consider how these events have impact the political landscape, the alliances and rivals between nations or factions, and even the geography of your world. History isn't just a backdrop, it's a driving force that shapes your characters' motivations, their fears, their desires, and understanding the key moments in your world's past allows you to create a setting that feels layered and complex, where every aspect has a reason for being the way it is. In my world, I have gods, like real the gods exist like among the world. Not like the Greek gods where they're like I or the Norse. Yeah, the Greek gods were like, I'm playing with little stone statues and putting them moving around. No, the gods hang out, though not everyone knows that the gods are there. It's just, they like to be a part of the thing. So with that said, there was a god war. There are several god wars actually throughout the existence of time. The world itself has been reset three times by a god. Well, yeah, three times by a god. And those things change. Now, each time it was set, though, like history kind of repeated itself, but with changes. All right. And the whole point of the resets is the world needs to do better, or whatever the case may be. Like, why does it keep failing? Why does it keep failing? Right. And that leads to another storyline, which influences a future storyline. Um, the continents, they were all one big continent, and one of the god wars ended up breaking up the continents. Then some of the from that broken continent, right, that one big continent, pieces broke off, and that became the floating isles. But they're really floating continents. They're huge and they're high up, and that creates another layer around the planet. And then you have the surface level, and then there's another world beneath that in the core of the planet itself. Then there's another time, a history where the isles fall, and that destroys a lot. It's terrible. However, that creates a new landscape, a new way of life, and a new culture, a new history, right? So all these things exist, right? And these help create these like time zones or these time periods and or quote unquote cycles and stuff like that. So it's important to think about your history in the sense of how does it really fundamentally develop your world and where it comes from, where it is, and where it could be going. All right. Also, those catalysms, the destruction of stuff and how things keep repeating. That's why everything doesn't have, it hasn't really evolved to the technology that maybe we have, right? and that's why it takes place in like a medieval setting. Myths and legends, lore, myths and legends add a touch of wonder to your world. They are the stories passed down through generation, tales of heroes, tales of woe, gods, monsters, and magical events. Lore can influence how people live their daily lives, what they fear, and what they value. For instance, a legend about a vengeful forest spirit might lead villagers to leave offerings at the edge of the woods. And that's something that's true to our world. Or a story about a long lost hero could inspire a character to take up their mantle. It happens. Myths and legends can also serve as inspiration for characters, actions, add mystery to your plot, or provide clues that lead your characters on a quest. Additionally, like in my world right now, the first book of series one of a 3-part series. Each series is 5 books. It makes up the Maven War saga. What I am doing in these books is setting up lore and legends. So what's happening in these 3 series, which would be 15 books over the saga, but they are complete series. Like 5 books makes a series. It's a complete series. And then there's another 5 books. That's a complete series and so forth. Because they're different POVs or different existences. But that is setting up my future present, if that makes sense, and I'm creating the history and lore of this thing. And then I get to explore stuff before that too, because I weave in backstories and histories and stuff like that from the older generation characters that are there, and that sets up things. And it's all about weaving in the truth of history, and history is so important to even us today, and like where we've come from and what we're fighting for and what our present is and what we want to see our future as. Myths and legends from the acts of people create things. All right. And believe it or not, the Pablo Escobar is basically a myth and legends. Like his stories are myth and legends because they're just so crazy and the amount of money he had. And, even though he was a bad man and he did all these things, that is technically a myth and legend to us now because it happened. He's dead, he's gone, and his stories have been turned into other stories and et cetera, et cetera. And that creates like this. Did you know who's rich and wealthy and there's supposedly still money, because people today are still hunting for the money that could potentially be buried. All right, integrating history and lore into the narrative. Now, the key to effective world building is integration. It's about taking history and lore and placing it into the narrative naturally. It's not about stopping and be like, do you know the tale of Ruff Ruff and his great mystery man challenge? No, it's not like that. Instead of overwhelming readers with long exposition or expository passages, reveal the history and myths of your world through character dialogue or old documents, songs, or monuments. Like them passing a huge statue of somebody or seeing a mountain carved out or destroyed, right? And you're like, oh, that was 1,000 years ago. There was a huge war between mages, and that was whatever. If it's through dialogue or whatever, if they're walking through a city, certain cities, older cities would have that kind of history dug into it. Certain landmarks would have that kind of history. And you want your characters to interact with that history. Maybe they stumble upon ancient ruins. That's always a cliche we could jump into. An elder could tell them a story of the days of old and give them insight into their current journey. I remember 70 years ago. History and lore should be experienced through. History and lore should be experienced rather than just told, allowing readers to uncover the depth of your world alongside the characters. So as they learn or understand a lesson from history, or they start exploring things, or history itself starts driving them and becomes something more. So think of your history and how it can influence not really the narrative and say, without this history, the narrative wouldn't take place, but how it can like add some color to that experience, to that world. All right. History will shape culture and beliefs. It shapes religion. It shapes societal beliefs. And it's something you should consider on how these historical events in your world, or legends, or things that may or may not be true. For example, there is a debate if the evidence of the Bible is true or false, right? That's why there is a world of Christians. Just like there are other faiths that believe their Bibles are real and some people say it's fake, right? So there's always that argument. So that's something to think about with your historical context, molding or adding to the debate. And that would create festivals and taboos and traditions, Christmas, Easter, right? All these things. And when it comes to your own world, think about how it creates, and they could be lies, they could be truths, they could be some truths, they could be mostly lie with some truth, right? You get to do that with your history because depending on how old the history is, right? Because a kingdom that once fought off an invading force might celebrate a day of independence. Well, a society with a creation, well, a society with a creation myth involving water spirits might have taboos around polluting rivers. These cultural aspects add layers to your story and create opportunities for conflict and character development. They provide reasons for why societies behave the way they do, why certain regions are at odds, and why characters hold particular beliefs. Three more. Providing motivations and conflicts. History and law can also serve as a source of motivation and conflict. Characters might be driven by a desire to restore their family's honor after a historical betrayal, or they might seek a powerful artifact mentioned in the old legend. If you ever see National Treasure, the second one, he's trying to make right the Gates name. In the first one, the Gates family is part of this protective thing of the treasure. So history does play a part to that story directly. Now, different interpretations of historical events could lead to political tension or even war. The more you understand the history and law of your world, the more you can use it to create meaningful conflicts that drive your plot forward. It provides context for why different factions or characters clash and adds a layer of complexity for the readers to engage in. Even if you look at Way of Kings, there's a history that led up to that. There's a history of the warriors, there's a history of how Stormfather, all these things add something to the present. Lord of the Rings, absolutely, right? So you have the one ring to rule them all. You got the 3 rings for the elves. What is it? The 7 for the dwarves and the 9 for men, or something like that. All that, right? We don't actually see that unfold. It's just told to us, and then Frodo is dealing with the One Ring, and the history indeed has influenced that story. 6. Avoid overwhelming the reality. It's simple. It's simple to get lost in building an elaborate history and lore and taking up much of your time before even getting to the writing. But remember that not every detail needs to be included in your story, nor do you have to figure out every detail before you start writing your narrative. Focus on the aspects that directly impact your narrative or impact the character development. Think of your world's history like an iceberg. Most of it remains beneath the surface, but the parts that do show are essential for the narrative. More specifically, the story of your narrative. Because remember, on this channel, we say that every narrative is made of plot and story. Plot is what needs to happen no matter what, and story is how it unfolds through the emotional experience and choices of your characters. So selectively revealing details keeps readers intrigued without bogging down the narrative, creating a balance, without bogging down the narrative, overwhelming them with exposition, and it helps to create a balance between rich world building and compelling storytelling. All right, number 7. Build future history in the present. So I was talking about this earlier with my the saga. When writing a story on a large scale or even a smaller intimate moments, think of your narrative as if you're writing the future history of your world. Consider the long lasting impressions that events of your story will have. How will they be spoken about in history books or retold around a warm hearth? Take the time to imagine how you would recount these events to the next generation, describing the time before they were born. All these elements help establish the weight, depth, and value of what's occurring within your world. After all, the history and law of your world are being molded in the present of your story. The actions, descriptions, decisions, and even the events happening now will become the lore and history that future generations will reference, giving your narrative a sense of significance and continuity. Something that really made me think was one of my readers, one of my alpha readers. They they uh they were reading the end of the book, the first book, and they were like, just the end of this book really put into perspective of like how far the characters came from the beginning of the book. And even though the actual story, like when everything just starts unfold, like it just goes, takes place over like basically 6 days. But the first act takes place like over 9 years, because there's like time jumps. So it like stays, you know, in these time jumps. But those moments in time are important because it's setting the future conflicts and stuff like that, which also allows me to write other stories within those time periods because it's 9 years. Anyway, they were saying like they were thinking about how much it's going to feel like change when they read the second, third, fourth, and fifth book. But they were also saying that like because I allowed such a youth of the history, meaning like we see the main protagonist in the prologue at 9 years old, and then we see him 5 years later, and then we see him when we watch him grow until he's 18, and then the story moves on pretty much chronicle order from 18. The series itself is going to take place over a very long time. However, when they were like, you can clearly see like there's going to be a point when people read this book. That's what he was telling me. When people read this book, and even when he reads the book, how basically he's going to be able to look back and be like, wow, I remember when he was a kid and he was like just running around in the stream trying to find rocks to nape rock knives, or when he went through his first trial, or when he like all these little firsts, but like he's going to be a very specific person that is different from that person we knew back on page 1. So that's how powerful writing history now for the future. Like if we write history in the present, what does that look like and how it's going to be referenced in the future? So it's something to think about, something interesting. Which brings me to my final thoughts. When you're exploring the history and lore of your world, it will help you build a setting that feels lived in and vibrant. It's the weight of the past that echoes of what came before, right? So it's the weight of the past, the echoes of what came before that makes the present feel significant. By weaving historical events, myths, cultural legends into your story, you provide depth and texture, inviting readers to immerse themselves fully in your world and its mysteries, because it becomes something that is living, that is ever changing, that is evolving. So don't be afraid to think outside the box and take risks with elements you create. Allow yourself to break things, allow yourself to fix things, allow yourself to go beyond what you think might be possible. Sometimes you'll be surprised. You will surprise yourself and the characters. The process does take time, and that's okay, because each detail you add will eventually help you discover your unique voice as a writer. The more you push things, the more you think outside the box, the more you find solutions, the more you start trying things and failing, it will develop your voice. Ultimately, remember, it's all made up, which means you have the freedom to change, adapt, and evolve your story as needed. So just have fun, enjoy it. World building is about exploring possibilities and breathing life into the places and characters you envision. So let your imagination guide you, embrace the unexpected, and Enjoy the adventure of crafting a rich and vibrant world that readers will get lost in. Next video in the series, we are going to talk about crafting epic storylines. Question: how do you incorporate history and law into your world currently? Do you have a favorite method? Let us know in the comments below. Let's help one another grow as a community. All right. If you haven't done so already, please subscribe and hit the bell icon so you don't miss out. Other than that, keep developing the right mindset. I'll see you next time. Bye.